ask a follow-up. The sequencing, obviously, you thought it through carefully. The other thing that I find fascinating and quite brilliant about the strategy relates to something else you said. You were persuaded, because you knew, President Bush was going to do this anyway. He said he would not let it stand. And you knew, and you communicated to others, that he was not going to let it stand. Okay. So in persuading people to join the coalition, I'm wondering whether an additional argument might be, look, he may not be prepared to withdraw without war, but the best chance we have is if we show him that the world is against him, right, and that the American Congress is behind it and has authorized it. Right. Because then those who, in fact, weren't enthusiastic were sort of thinking, well, what they're saying is the best way to perhaps prevent this armed conflict is for me to line up behind my leader. And I'm just wondering, I suspect that was part of the conscious strategy.
That was part of it, but remember this, there weren't any converts left to convert after we got that UN resolution and the congressional vote.
No, but I'm saying in getting the congressional vote, I think an additional thing would be to say to the Doves, look, if we're going to have any chance of getting him out, or did you just assume, did no one think there would be any chance that the threat of war might get Saddam to pull back?
Well, I think you're right, and that entered into our calculus when we decided to take these steps and do these things. We were very fortunate. I mean, particularly with that UN resolution, that's not an easy thing to do. Another thing we did, which when I reflect back on it, I find rather surprising, we had Arab troops participating with us, including from Syria. I mean, the Syrians sent 2 divisions into the Gulf, and they were part of the coalition. The Egyptians, the Syrians, the Jordanians, and it was truly an unprecedented international coalition. But we would never have gotten to Congress had we not first gotten the UN.
Mr. Secretary, you then had to think about the end game of the diplomacy before the American counterattack against Saddam Hussein, and you went to meet Tariq Aziz on January 9th. And I think we know now from all the books that have been published, there was a lot of disagreement within the Bush administration about whether or not you should go.
That's right.
To meet Tariq Aziz. You were trying to exhaust diplomacy and show the world that there were no other options. How did you handle the internal battle? And a question about Tariq Aziz, if he had showed up with a really creative proposal for diplomacy, might that have stopped the U.S. coalition in its tracks?
It could have really been a problem, but there was never any, I never had any difficulty internally, but for the reason I mentioned to you in the first session. I was seamless with my president. I knew, I mean, he had come to me earlier and said, he'd earlier made a proposal, you may have forgotten this, that I go to Baghdad and meet with Saddam and that Tariq Aziz come to Washington and meet with him. But Saddam wouldn't give us a date that didn't back right up to our deadline of January 15. He had time to see people like John Connolly and Oscar Wyatt from Houston, his old buddies and things. They went over there to see him. He could make time for them, couldn't make time for the Secretary of State of the United States. But he was a real miscalculator, I got to tell you. But there wasn't really, there was a lot of nervousness. The Saudis were nervous. They thought that I might make a deal. There were some in the administration who were nervous because I was known for sometimes reaching agreements and making things happen. Bad deal, I guess. But anyway, there was never any chance that we were going to negotiate down from the language of a UN Security Council resolution. And that language was quite clear. Get out of Kuwait unconditionally. So if you read the transcript, it's been declassified now, of that meeting with Tariq Aziz, you find it fascinating because he kept bringing up things like, we got to give the Palestinians something. Saddam has to have something that he can point to. And we said, no, wait a minute. We got a United Nations Security Council resolution. We're not here to negotiate down from that. And we didn't. and yeah, I can understand the nervousness, but my president wasn't nervous, okay? Let the other nervous Nellies be nervous, okay, but there's only one vote, you know, in an administration. The only person who has a vote is the president. And I knew where I was with my president, and he knew where I was, and he knew I wasn't going to negotiate down from that resolution.
Which would have been better coming out of that meeting? If he just knuckled under and said, okay, we're out? Or many people at the time said, that's the nightmare scenario. We need a visible victory. We need to weaken him militarily, and that's more in the U.S. and regional interest. How do you rate those?
Well, I don't know that I would rate a hypothetical, but because I think what we did was really the right thing to do, and that it unfolded in a textbook case way. I tell people, if you want to know how to fight a war, go look at the way we fought that war. We said what we were going to do. We did it. We got the rest of the world with us. Then we got the American people in the Congress with us. And guess what? We got everybody else to pay for it. We didn't pay for that war. We got the people in the region whom we were helping, the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, and others. That war cost $65 billion. We paid $10 billion of it. And everybody else paid the rest. That's the way to fight a war. And the one thing that could have given us a problem would have been if he had started pulling out, started a withdrawal, but didn't. But it wasn't going to be complete, and just started. He jacked us around from that standpoint. But he wasn't smart enough to do that. I mean, he really was a miscalculator.
I'd like to. I wrote an article once saying that Saddam was the world's worst negotiator. Yeah. And in one respect only, he was like my beloved late father-in-law, who was a wonderful man and not like Saddam in any other respect. and you're going to have to put yourself back. My father-in-law and my wife's mother went to Florida every year between about 1950 and 1975. And each year, my father-in-law wanted to buy a condominium for last year's price. Mm-hmm. He never bought one. And it's often struck me that, and it happened repeatedly, that Saddam could have done, if Saddam had been advised by someone as able as you, he could have done things that would have put enormous pressure on our coalition. I mean, you just gave an example. Yeah. He doesn't commit to getting out entirely, but he says he starts moving out rather slowly, taking a bunch of stuff with him on the way. Right. Query under those circumstances whether you can begin a war. That's right. And there were similar things where he would make offers, which when facts changed on the ground, which if made earlier, might have made a difference, at least in terms of putting pressure on our coalition, because it was a pretty fragile one. I mean, as you say, 52-48 in the Congress. And I guess my question is, other than a slow pullout, were there other moves that in terms of this international chess game you really thought about where we hope he doesn't do this? Because if so, it's going to make our hand a lot harder.
No, the only thing we really worried about was an actual partial pullout beginning by the deadline date. An announcement from him that he was going to pull out and nobody would believe. I don't think a lot of people would believe. And look, there were our allies in that coalition wanted him out of there. Okay, so I don't think that would have been a restraining, and I don't think that would have caused a defeat in the Congress, in either the House or the Senate. We'd given him, after all, 6 months. We set our deadline 6 months before it came.